And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law.
It's a legal matter, baby. A legal matter from now on.
And welcome to The Law Show on CL 650. I'm Zach Spencer, and today we're talking about immigration law, and specifically the border. And joining us in studio, Gordon Maynard and Alex Stojkovic from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver. We had both of you back on at the beginning of July, and now we're here again talking about the border for a second time. First time round, we're talking about the border and the kind of rules that or the pitfalls you can get into crossing the border and the jurisdiction that they have over different elements of the border. Now we're going to talk about enforcement issues. So, Alex, why don't you start on what you see are the issues there?
Sure. Thank you, Zach. And listening to Pete Townsend just a moment ago, and as someone who's, I'm sure, not certainly familiar with legal issues of his own over the years.
That was something entirely different.
Yes and no. It might have actually been under the jurisdiction of Canada Border Services these days. When the agency was formed, Canada Border Services, because it included both the enforcement wing of the Immigration Department as well as the border, it became all of a sudden a fairly large department. And their mandate remains the enforcement of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And their role there is almost exclusive. They're the only ones that do most of the enforcement of the actual law. So, for example, there's a series of offenses under IRPA. We refer to them as offenses because they are. They're drafted as if they were criminal code offenses that they're actually responsible for enforcing. So not only do they do the arrest, but they also put forward the report to the prosecutor, and they arrange for the prosecution of the offense as well. That's something that they've evolved into. That's something that before they would just pass information on to the police, and the police would have this mandate, but now increasingly they're doing the prosecutions directly. And that's an evolution of their authority over time. They are also responsible for people that are inadmissible to Canada. Now, some people can be both charged and are inadmissible. We'll get into that later, but the context is that they have this dual role where they report you for being inadmissible for whatever reason, and they also are able to prosecute, including against Canadian citizens, for violation of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act.
So you're talking about they have the ability to turn people back, not allowed into the country, but they also have the ability to go after people who are in the country who they believe
Correct.
Is up to no good. Right?
That's right. That's right. And their powers have evolved in this context quite a bit. To give you some context in terms of what enforcement means, in 2000, Canada let in about 235,000 immigrants legally. These are people who became new permanent residents. Mm-hmm. Last year, that number was, Gordon can correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere in the neighborhood of 273,000.
It keeps going up most years, doesn't it?
But incrementally and in small numbers. In contrast, the number of people that was deported in 2000 was 7,000, and last year was 21,000. So we deport 300% more than we did in the 1990s, compared to a number of immigrants, which has remained largely similar. I mean, the 235, 270, that's not a threefold increase.
So is this just a better net to catch these people? Were they going through the net before? Or is it just more militant border?
What would you say to that, Gordon?
It's a combination of factors. There's been changes to the law to create more inadmissibility, changes to process to allow it to be processed faster. And inadmissibility doesn't mean what you think it means.
Well, explain it, what we think and what it really is.
When people hear the word inadmissibility, you think people who aren't allowed into Canada. Mm-hmm. But inadmissibility is a word that means anything that allows us either to stop you from coming in, so that can be foreigners coming to Canada the way you normally think about it, and you say, no, you're not allowed to come in, you're a human rights violator. No, you're a terrorist. No, you're a criminal. Mm-hmm. Right? It also means people who are in Canada, sometimes with complete rights to be in Canada, immigrants, permanent residents, students, workers. It's a ground by which CBSA can say, you know what, we're taking away your status and we're going to require you to leave Canada. That's called an inadmissibility as well. right? So
Okay,
it's
so
not just
it's not just stopping you at the border, it's turning people around who have been here.
So you can become
right.
inadmissible, in other words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're living your life, and then all of a sudden you become or they find you to be inadmissible.
right.
So
and
what would give me an example of somebody who's been living in Canada and then finds out they're no longer admissible?
Oh, there's 9 grounds of inadmissibility out there, but
What
the
is
common
one
ones.
common one, yeah.
Well, common ones are things like criminality. So you come here as a child, your parents come here, you're 10 years old, you go to school here, you become an adult, you get into trouble in your teenage years as an adult, you acquire an adult conviction, you can be determined to be inadmissible and removable from Canada. You lose your status and you're sent to a country that you used to belong to, and now you're being sent back to.
So you're charged with assault. That would be enough for somebody to be deported from the country?
Assault causing bodily harm, or if you got a 6-month sentence, yeah.
Or if you were street racing and you were in a street race where somebody was badly hurt and you got jail time for that, 6 months in jail or a 2-year sentence, for example, which are not unheard of in street racer cases, you could face removal.
Or any number of drug charges. You know, there's lots of offenses that capture you.
These young people that come, say, for example, in your example, 8, 10 years old, and they grow up, and they might even be aware that this could happen.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
That's a common problem, actually.
Yeah.
Now, I would suggest that, we're talking about 2000, 2001. The world has changed a lot since then with 9/11 and, terrorism cells and all the issues that governments have to deal with. So tightening the net is probably a good thing, most people would say. But what you're saying is a lot of these people that are being deported, it's not for those reasons.
Well, I mean,
That's right.
The tightening of the net was to deal with terrorism issues, no question. That was the impetus for it. But what tightening meant was implementing technological change at the ports of entry and in information sharing between various countries. Those elements have played the biggest role in determining finding people inadmissible. For example, today, compared to 20 years ago, Canada Border Services and the police departments and the various federal authorities that deal with immigration, including Canada Border Services, CIC, they share information a lot more seamlessly than they used to. They didn't 20 years ago particularly well.
Isn't this the big uproar? Or is it C-51? The Conservatives passed about CSIS being able to talk with the RCMP and all.
Well, that's even that's taking it even further than
yeah.
where it's already gone. I mean, since 2000, 2001, we've had an information sharing agreement with the United States where officers have access to NCIC and American officers have access to all of the Canadian criminal computer systems. So CPIC, which is where the RCMP keeps criminal information, that's accessible to every U.S. officer.
Would the average person say that's not a bad thing? I mean, if they're out there to catch bad guys, don't they need as much information as they can get? So
Sure, but people need to realize this, and we've also signed agreements now with Australia, New Zealand, the UK. So there's 5 countries now that share both immigration information, so people who've previously applied for study permits or various other things, and then turn around and apply to Canada and say they've never been refused anywhere else. They can be caught if they did apply somewhere else. Their criminal information is largely shared, and that's a big part of why there's so many more people who are being caught and found inadmissible than there used to be. Gordon's certainly right that there are more grounds for them to be found inadmissible, but access to information is considerably greater because of technological innovation than there used to be also.
Also, I want to give you an example I think is closer to the point you raised, which is, say, 5-6 years ago, I think it was, the Conservative government under Minister Jason Kenney introduced the Faster Removal of Foreign Criminals Act. Faster Removal of Foreign Criminals Act. And what he told the public was that foreign criminals were using loopholes in the law and appeals to avoid removal from Canada and to commit crimes during that delay.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the people who were impacted by the law were permanent residents in Canada, not foreign criminals, people who had a right to live in Canada, people who had come here as children.
So what would their reason be for being sent out of the country? Give me an example of something.
Well, the example under that act was, for instance, if you are a permanent resident in Canada, let's say that child who comes here at 10 and as an adult commits crimes, you get a removal order because you're a permanent resident who committed a criminal offense of a certain level. But in the process, you have what's known as an appeal. It's a review by a tribunal to determine whether or not in all the circumstances of the case you should be removed from Canada. Some people have, a criminal history that demands they be removed. Common sense tells you that. Other people, maybe not so much. It depends how long you've been here, what you did, and where you're going to.
And
right?
so this
It's
fast track system.
The faster removal of foreign criminals was against those people. And the law at the time said that if you had a 2-year criminal sentence, you didn't have a right of appeal. This law changed that to a 6-month rule. If you get a 6-month sentence, there is no review of your removal order to look at the circumstances.
Even if you've been here
casing.
40 years, even if you've never been back to the UK or Austria or wherever it is that you're from,
even
you're
if
gone.
Even if the sentence you got was a 6-month conditional sentence order, where you don't even go to jail. It's one of those home arrest things that are meant to be used in cases that aren't so serious. And now the Conservatives later amended that law again. It can be applied, that rule can be applied now even in foreign convictions. You go down to the States and you commit a certain offense down there, even if you didn't go to jail at all.
So you're a permanent resident. You're living in Canada. You charged with an offense in the United States, and you can be sent out of Canada back to your country of origin.
It's far worse than that, okay? Because that isn't even the most egregious of what's possible. Let's say 2 19-year-olds go down to Seattle from Vancouver, both permanent residents.
Excuse
me. In Seattle, they go to a nightclub using fake ID,
right?
Where the drinking age is 21.
And that's probably quite common.
When they come back to the border, if they're asked, "What were you doing in the States?" and they honestly answer, and we just said, on our last show that you should tell the truth.
Yeah.
Well, we went to nightclubbing, and if the officer then asks, how did you do that, and you admit that you were using fake ID, the fact is you've now admitted to an act that if committed in Canada would be equivalent to a criminal offense. And you might put yourself in a position where they could actually report you for an inadmissibility. That's how stark the law was written.
And you would get a removal order that can't be appealed.
That's right.
That's the impact of this law as it stands right now.
Even though no one's even charged you.
Ridiculous law. Absolutely ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous law. But
So
there you are.
All right. So when we come back, we're going to find out if there's change afoot with this.
There better be.
Next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.